Hi, I'm Glenn Rollans, publisher and owner of Brush Education in Edmonton, a higher education publishing house, and owner of Freehand Books in Calgary, a literary publisher. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the intersection between generative artificial intelligence, or Gen AI, and book publishing in Canada from the point of view of a small, independent, Alberta-based book publisher. I'll talk mostly about large language models, or LLMs, the form of Gen AI most closely connected to the publishing world. The most famous of these is OpenAI's ChatGPT, but there are many others now in the public sphere and many more still in internal use or in development. LLMs are trained on large volumes of text. Books are much more valuable as training data than, for example, random text scraped from the internet. So books have been heavily used in AI development, often, especially during the early years, without permission, attribution, or compensation. The resulting LLMs have then been used in some ways that support the work of authors and publishers, and in many other ways that replace the work of authors and publishers. AIs designed to generate images, music, and video have followed similar paths and strategies during development and in eventual release. From a publisher's perspective, this is a scenario that begins with injustice, moves on to opportunity, and leads from there directly to threat. A very complicated situation. Infringement of our copyright takes place when our works are input or copied, and Gen AI outputs may involve further infringement. If not direct infringement of the right to reproduce a work, then perhaps infringement of the right of adaptation or translation, for example. With many creative workers around the world, we believe that a positive role for generative AIs in our economy and our society depends on a number of factors. Transparency. What was copied as the training database for the Gen AI, and who did it belong to? Attribution. When an author's work forms the foundation of LLM-generated text, how are they credited as a source? Permission. How can copyright holders exercise their right to permit or refuse being copied into training databases? How can they exercise their right to control the generation of adaptations or translations of their work? Compensation. Having provided the foundation for LLMs and in expectation of continuing to be relied upon for improving and updating LLMs in the future, how will copyright holders be compensated by the multi-billion-dollar companies that are now commercializing LLMs? Regulation. What guardrails can we expect our government to put into place around the uncompensated appropriation of our works for AI training and the resulting juggernaut of competition that LLM outputs will be in our future? LLMs are not going away, and they will continue to improve. Their convenience already leads some researchers to ignore their unreliability. Their speed at generating scenarios and text already leads some writers to forgive their tendency to plagiarize. All of AI's different capacities lead more and more publishers, including Alberta publishers, to use them in parts of their workflow in the hopes of finding some savings in a steadily more difficult business environment. Back in October 2018, I said this to the Heritage Committee in Ottawa, quote, "Some commentators argue that research into artificial intelligence requires broad copyright exceptions, allowing machine learning to ingest large volumes of published works. But there's no justification for requiring a sector that operates on very thin margins to subsidize a sector that can well afford to pay a fair price to its suppliers. The many copyright holders who have filed lawsuits against AI developers for using their books to train LLMs without compensation feel the same way. At the time I'm recording this, more than 40 cases are in the courts in the US. And in Canada, as many as 7 class actions have been filed by copyright holders against AI developers. Here in 2025, the government of Canada is still far from getting its house in order. In 2022, it introduced legislation on AI as part of its Digital Charter Implementation Act. But when Parliament prorogued at the end of 2024, this act died with it. Earlier this year, Canada's first AI minister, Evan Solomon, was appointed. Minister Solomon has been very public in saying that he wants to increase the adoption of AI by Canadian businesses and to create an environment in Canada that is supportive of AI development. But so far, he has mentioned the issue of privacy more often than the issues of copyright. The interests of publishers and developers are often at odds. Developers wish to find the most efficient way to gather data, often at the expense of devaluing the knowledge and creativity of those who provided those materials, such as Canada's authors and publishers. This is definitely a hill for us to die on, and so we will fight these legal battles hard, but we're fighting some of the biggest, most aggressive companies in the world. Canada's book publishers, or rather Alberta's book publishers, have long been early adopters of new technology, me included. We're not Luddites waving pitchforks at these issues. Many tech innovations, such as web-based sales, digital design, ebooks, and more, have been very important to our ability to stay in business. As small and medium-sized shops, we have usually embraced new technologies as ways of making good work possible. Gen AIs offer potential efficiencies in all these areas of creation and bringing creations to their audiences, and many more. But while many of us are now using Gen AI in our daily work, most of us are being cautious about approaching AI with our usual appetite for new technologies. The list of less controversial uses by traditional publishers is extensive. Drafting promotional text, analyzing sales or stock data, drafting email, drafting alternative text for accessible ebooks, drafting ancillary teacher resources and interactives based on original textbooks, formatting references, identifying editorial issues, and summarizing complex documents, for example. More controversial possible uses of AI include audiobook narration, translation from English to other languages, background research, creation of illustrations, actual editing of human-authored works, and actual writing of new works. All of these uses directly replace human workers. As machine-generated works, none of the resulting works are protected by copyright. Most free versions of LLMs, or large language models such as ChatGPT, harvest the text that users upload in prompts or as references for desired output to further train their models. Virtually all of which have been previously trained to a great extent on text scraped from the internet or accessed from pirated sites, without permission from or compensation to the copyright holders. So it's very controversial, very contrary to best practices to compound this original sin of the Gen AI developers by voluntarily contributing more to their training databases. Most publishers who try to use Gen AI responsibly do so through paid licenses that prevent this harvesting of their uploads. And they try to work with LLMs that have the best licensing practices for their training databases, at least going forward, if not in the past. Another concern is that e-retailers, such as Amazon, are flooded these days with books written by AIs. These AI-authored books are often titled in confusingly similar ways to current bestsellers, and they typically bear authors' names that are somehow familiar but not quite right. They are priced far below the human author titles that they imitate. So unwary buyers find themselves with inexpensive but unreadable and worthless AI creations on their hands when the books are delivered. Some published inboxes are flooded with artificial content. My Alberta colleagues and I see the suspicious verbosity and blandness of AI-generated text more and more often in submissions. I don't know personally anyone yet who is using some of the commercially available tools for detecting AI-generated text, but most of us now have provisions in our author contracts asking for a declaration that submitted works are human authored. Most of us publishers commit to authors in return to not license their works for AI development without the specific written permission of the author. Some of the largest presses have had offers from AI developers, licensing offers, but as usual, smaller rights holders have been left out of that discussion, even though their works have not been left out of the pirated collections used to train LLMs. We've been pirated too. So stay tuned. AI developers will continue to use works without permission to create value for themselves, and they will continue to resist sharing those benefits. People, including publishers, will continue to seek efficiencies through using Gen AI tools while assuming both known and unknown risks in the process. The courts will grind on, trying to understand and clarify the rights and wrongs of the situations put before them. And the government of Canada will continue trying to catch up.